The day that changed world history forever, and most people don't know it. On May 29, 1453, a single day of fighting ended a 1,000-year-old empire, and accidentally set off a chain of events that helped reshape trade, exploration, and the flow of knowledge across the entire world. One siege. One day. And centuries later, historians are still tracing the ripple effects. You probably learned about it as just another date in a textbook. This is the day Constantinople fell, and what happened next helped change the world. Let's set the scene. Constantinople wasn't some random medieval town with a castle and a few horses running around. This place was basically the New York, London, and Wall Street of its era, all rolled into one. It sat directly between Europe and Asia, controlling one of the most valuable strategic locations on Earth. Ships passed through. Merchants passed through. Armies passed through. And wealth passed through, all of it. The markets overflowed with silk, spices, precious metals, and luxury goods from 3 continents. And then there were the walls. Constantinople's legendary Theodosian walls were an absolute nightmare for anyone foolish enough to attack. Multiple layers of fortifications, towers, moats, massive stone defenses. For centuries, armies had shown up outside these walls, taken one look, and basically said, yeah, maybe next year. Arab armies tried. Bulgarian armies tried. Crusaders actually got inside once in 1204, but that's a whole different disaster for another video. The point is, this city had built a reputation as the ultimate medieval fortress. It wasn't just a city, it was the medieval equivalent of a server with the best cybersecurity money could buy. Except the password was made of stone. And by 1453, that password was about to get cracked. There was just one problem. The empire behind those legendary walls wasn't exactly having its best financial quarter. Centuries of wars, plagues, and political infighting had slowly reduced the Byzantine Empire, once a territory stretching across 3 continents, down to basically the city itself and a handful of scattered leftovers. Imagine a company that once had offices on every continent, and now owns exactly one building, but still proudly displays the original logo out front like nothing's changed. That was Byzantium in 1453. The city was legendary. The empire behind it was running on fumes. And that's exactly when Mehmed II showed up with a plan. 21 years old. At an age when most people are still figuring out what career they want, Mehmed had already decided his life's mission was conquering the single most fortified city on the planet. And he wasn't some reckless kid swinging a sword around either. He was calculated, multilingual, and had reportedly studied this city's defenses since childhood like it was his personal final exam. He understood something every conqueror before him had missed. If you can't get through walls that have survived 1,000 years, you don't try harder, you change the entire game. That something was cannons. Not the tiny decorative ones from medieval movies, the biggest siege weapons ever built up to that point in human history. Designed by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, who, in a genuinely brutal plot twist, had actually offered his services to the Byzantines first. They couldn't afford him. Mehmed could. It's basically the medieval version of losing your best engineer to a rival because you wouldn't match their offer, except this engineer's next project was demolishing your headquarters. The largest of these cannons could fire a stone ball weighing roughly 500 kilograms, about the weight of a grand piano. Now imagine someone loading a grand piano into a cannon and firing it directly at your house. That's the situation Constantinople was dealing with. In April 1453, Mehmed's army, somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 men, surrounded the city. Defending it, only a few thousand troops, a mix of Byzantine soldiers and volunteer forces from Genoa and Venice who'd shown up to help. If this were a sports betting line, absolutely nobody is putting money on the defenders here. For weeks, the cannons pounded the walls non-stop. Boom, another section damaged. Boom, another breach. And every single night, exhausted and outnumbered, the defenders rushed out to repair the day's damage with rubble and wood. Imagine trying to patch your website in real time while someone is actively launching cyber attacks against the server, except instead of an IT department, it's exhausted medieval soldiers hauling rocks in the dark. Every morning basically played out the same conversation. The Ottomans, we broke the wall. The Byzantines, we fixed the wall. The Ottomans, we'll break it again, and this cycle repeated for weeks. Then Mehmed pulled off one of the most audacious military moves ever recorded. The city's harbor, the Golden Horn, was protected by a massive chain stretched across its entrance, physically blocking enemy ships. His navy tried to break through it. Didn't work. So instead of trying to break the unbreakable chain, he did something almost cartoonishly clever, he went around it entirely. Mehmed had his men build a road of greased logs, and drag dozens of full-sized warships overland, over a hill, completely bypassing the chain, then drop them straight into the harbor from behind. The defenders woke up one morning to find enemy warships inside the harbor where enemy warships were absolutely not supposed to be. It's the medieval equivalent of installing a fortress-grade security system, and then discovering the attacker simply picked up your entire house and walked it around to the back door. By late May, the city was exhausted, the walls battered, the defenders stretched impossibly thin. Before dawn on May 29, the final assault began. Wave after wave of Ottoman soldiers attacked. The first waves were pushed back. Then the next. But they weren't necessarily there to win immediately, they were wearing the defenders down, like a boss fight where every time you think you've won, another health bar appears. Eventually the elite Ottoman janissaries entered the fight, and disaster struck. A small gate known as the Kirkeporte was reportedly found open, whether by accident or exaggerated in later retellings is still debated, but Ottoman troops poured through. The centuries-old walls that had held for 1,000 years finally gave way, and the city was flooded with Ottoman soldiers. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, understood exactly what was happening. No rescue army was coming. No miracle fleet. According to later accounts, he tore off his imperial regalia and joined the fighting in the streets alongside his remaining soldiers. He was never definitively identified afterward. By nightfall, an empire that had survived for over 1,000 years was simply gone. Not gradually, not over decades. Gone, in a single day. Here's the part most people completely miss in school. This wasn't just, an empire fell, sad, moving on. It quietly rerouted the entire global economy. Constantinople controlled the land trade routes between Europe and Asia, including the wildly profitable spice trade, pepper, cinnamon, silk, the kind of goods that made merchants absurdly rich. With the Ottomans now controlling that route and taxing it heavily, trading with Asia got a lot more expensive and a lot more dangerous for Europeans, almost overnight. It's not unlike watching a major supply chain route get hit with massive new tariffs, businesses panic, and suddenly everyone's hunting for an alternate route. And that's exactly what happened. European nations, desperate for a way to reach Asia without depending on routes controlled by their rivals, started throwing money at increasingly ambitious sea voyages. This is part of what pushed Christopher Columbus, who wasn't actually trying to discover America, he was trying to find a faster westward route to Asia, to make his famous 1492 voyage. He got the size of the Earth badly wrong. Fortunately for him, there happened to be an entire continent sitting in the way. Now, to be fair, history doesn't work like a row of perfectly placed dominoes. Columbus had other motivations, and European exploration was already picking up speed before 1453. But the fall of Constantinople was one significant piece of a much larger transformation, one of the links in a very long chain that eventually led to European ships crossing the Atlantic, launching the age of exploration and reshaping the entire planet. There's one more ripple effect, and this one has nothing to do with money. As the city fell, a wave of Greek scholars, philosophers, and artists fled west into Europe, carrying with them centuries of preserved ancient Greek and Roman texts, mathematics, philosophy, and classical knowledge. The Renaissance didn't suddenly begin because of this, it was already stirring in Italy, but this sudden influx of classical knowledge is widely believed to have poured fuel on a fire that was already catching. It's almost like Europe suddenly gained access to a giant backup drive full of its own intellectual past, and everyone was very interested in opening the files. So why does any of this matter to you, watching this hundreds of years later? Because you're living in the aftermath. The borders on modern maps. The rise of global trade networks. The languages spoken around the world. The routes goods travel across oceans every single day. None of it appeared out of nowhere. It was built through thousands of decisions, wars, accidents, and unexpected consequences, and sometimes, one of the biggest turning points happens in a single city, on a single day. One day. One siege. One empire's collapse. And more than 5 centuries later, we're still living with the consequences. Subscribe if this changed how you look at history, subscribe, because next time, we're breaking down a piece of geopolitics still unfolding right now, and why it matters more than most people realize.